So, my name is Edith Kimani, and I happen to tell stories for a living. I'm a journalist, and I want to welcome you to this session on Indigenous wisdom and climate change. And for me, I think that it couldn't be more urgent, but also more overdue. So because I'm a storyteller, I'd like to begin with one. I've only recently come back from Nigeria, where I spent 2 weeks covering a story about traditional herdsmen who are in conflict with farmers. If you're from West Africa, you might have heard this story. So the people who are fighting are the Fulani. These are herdsmen who go from basically Senegal all the way to Sudan. So this is the largest group of geographically dispersed persons in Africa. But when we went to interview them, they told us that we're the first group of people to ever speak to them. No activist, no politician, nobody has ever gone to listen to their story. And this also happened when we interviewed some people in Turkana. They told us the same thing. And this is a story that I hear over and over and over again when we have Indigenous people in front of us. But today, we want to change that conversation because Indigenous peoples make up 5% of the world's population, but guess what? They protect up to 80% of its biodiversity. But we never hear them represented. But we want to fix that today, which is why I want to introduce and invite my lovely all-women panel on stage. Waringa Wahome, you've heard that she is a lawyer. I asked if she was a political theorist. She said somewhat. So a somewhat political theorist and an activist whose work really puts power back in the hands of communities. Welcome, Waringa. We're also joined by Joan Otieno, who is an artist. I think you can tell by how she's dressed that she's very much an artist. She's also an environmentalist, and she's transforming trash to art. She'll be telling us how. And also has enough time to mentor a new generation of eco-warriors. Welcome, Joan. And last but not least, we have Bia'ni Madsa Juárez López, who is a biologist and Indigenous rights advocate whose work bridges science and tradition across Latin America. Please, a round of applause for them. So, Waringa, I want to start with you because when we talk about Indigenous wisdom, it goes back to Indigenous people. How do we categorize that? Who is Indigenous? Because as a Bantu, am I not Indigenous to Kenya, Africa?
In my opinion, first of all, hello, and thank you for having me in this discussion. I had planned to sneak in a quick response for one of the questions that had been asked in the previous panel before I get to that one, because it was in essence the question of whether the struggle of people right now, because I had him describe it as an abstract struggle. And I think that is something that we must be very clear on, because it is not an abstract struggle. It is a struggle of people who are every day, they already know, because people know they don't have food on their tables, and people know they don't have healthcare system that is working, an education system that is working. So I think it is wrong to merely describe the struggle that is going on in the country as an abstract struggle. But, thank you. But how do we qualify who is an Indigenous person? That is the most difficult question, I think, because I wouldn't have a way to define what an Indigenous person is. But what I hold is the position that nobody should be denied any dignity or health or any human right, whether a social justice question, whether it is a question of land, housing, based on whatever. As long as anybody is a human being, and as anybody lives on this earth, we are Indigenous of this earth. So it is not specifically of a location. However, it is a means of people to defend themselves. So if people are dispossessed of land where they have lived for all their lives, or people have been born in an area, sorry, I lost my voice, so I keep losing it as I speak. But if people have been dispossessed of their livelihoods, specifically of land, and it is because of being where they live, and they are chased out of that area, I think they can defend themselves. They can use the question of Indigenous people to defend themselves, to defend their livelihoods, and to defend their land.
All right, so let's just jump straight to Biani, because you did bring up the question of the challenges that Indigenous peoples are facing. I wonder what it's like in Latin America. You are actually part of the Oaxaca community, right? So any unique challenges that you might be experiencing that are very different from those of Indigenous persons on the continent of Africa?
Thank you. First, I want to contribute a little bit about what it is or how we define Indigenous peoples, because it has to be with with a political category. It's not like individually each culture, we have many cultures that don't like to be called indigenous because it was a category put outside of us. But since this is a political...
Sorry, what do you mean a category put out of you?
Because if you ask individual, for example, I heard here is used the term tribes. If you ask someone from a tribe what they are going to name their tribe, not indigenous, or as we were called in Latin America, for example, Indians, but we were not, or other nations prefer to be called original nations or first peoples, which have our preference. But since it is very linked to rights, it is a category that we all together internationally fought to define to get rights. So indigenous is a political category related to identity, collective. It is always collective, which is very important. Of course, it is linked with land and with cultural identity.
So because of this very layered nature of what an indigene is, how do you then define a unified struggle or a unified challenge? Because as I've described, the Fulani are spread all across Africa. If you look at the Maasai, they also have territories across various border points.
Yes, it's very linked because you mentioned that in our territories, we have a very big diversity and ecosystems. So in this world, when we need a lot of resources, where the capital is going to get it is from our land. So not only indigenous peoples, but all the people that maybe they don't call themselves indigenous, but they have resources in their lands as well. So yes, we are all linked and pressured to extract the resources from our communities and territories.
Okay, extraction is a main one. Waringa, you're nodding. Does that also track here in Kenya and in East Africa?
I think so, because the people who live in different areas also form different means of, fighting against this kind of struggles and, exploitative means of living or extractive means of living. Because in different areas, like she has described, we have people who come from indigenous areas. In urban areas, which I think is where I specifically organize, because I organize from an organization called Mathare Social Justice Center, which is in the informal settlement of Nairobi. And I think even there, it is the same question. It is a question of land, because it is people who live in very horrible living conditions of shanties and horrible buildings. And it is other people who have accumulated land that is meant to be productive, but they have accumulated a very big portion of land and left people to live in very small houses. Yeah. So as far as challenges, it is the same challenges, just in different contexts.
So same challenges, just in different environments. So Joan, it brings us to you with your role as an artist, because one of the best ways to tell stories is through art forms, right? I don't know how many of you watched Battle for Laikipia, but it tells a very difficult story in a very beautiful way. So Joan, I wonder if you're hearing from indigenous persons, how are they expressing themselves in art, and how is art being used to amplify their voice?
Yes. I will talk specifically about the slums of Korogocho, where I am stationed. Like, I've been there for 5 years, and I've had so many different people talk about different ways of survival in the slums. So we have different people. I can say it again. We have different people with different opinions. While at the same time being in a slum space where people are living in these very tiny, many houses and reproducing. Come on, we have so many children. There is opportunity also, because the children are available. There is opportunity. There's so many people in a very, in a huge but a very small space. Huge in the context of physical land, but very small in the context of how people think of what happens in the outside world. So I will say there is opportunity of being an artist there and having the chance to to connect to people, especially children and adults who are also available. Like, we have girls who are always around. We have women who don't do anything during the day. They're always there. So being in a space like that, I think, gives an artist an opportunity to create more stories, different views. Yeah.
And do these stories often come with solutions? Because I find that in those spaces, that's when people come up with the best ideas of how to come out of these situations. What are some of the ones that you can share with us?
I would say art is a very powerful tool in a community. So there are so many stories. There are different stories from different people. And you asked if they come with a solution?
Yeah, what kind of...
So there are different stories, so many different stories. Personally, I will talk as an artist. Personally, I share my stories with a younger generation, depending on the challenges they have at that particular time. So, for example, there's so much unemployment in the slums. So I come with an idea of, okay, we have resources, we have materials around, we have materials that would turn into stuff that will sell. That is now creation of employment. So that challenge of unemployment at some extent, is I would say to some extent solved. At least there's change. There's that small change. There's something. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And as you were speaking, Biani, I remembered that you did research that isn't directly linked to what Joan is talking about, but it beckons on the whole idea of urban pressures, overpopulation, and this conflict between whether the land should be left bare for the people or whether it should be used for development. So in your case, your research was on biodiversity in traditional coffee plantations in your community. Could you please tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, I also want to relate, because in this problem in the overpopulation in cities is most of the times caused because the lands, the territories are being taken, so the indigenous and also peasant communities are pushed and forced to move. So in that way, we need to recognize also the link in our realities through colonization, ongoing colonization, because a lot of indigenous peoples also had lost their identities. But still, after so many hundreds of years of colonization, in several communities, like one of my cultures, still we have the land, we manage to keep the collective government, which is very important, because in my research, what I was trying to prove, something that we know, but not with data necessarily, is crossing this biological data, but also social information to show how the collective indigenous governments are directly linked with conservation. So usually we hear, it's good to hear constantly this idea that indigenous peoples conserve or have biodiversity, but how that happens is not just an accident, it's because we have structures, organizations, and collective way of lives to support and sustain those territories.
Similarly, in the urban centers, Waringa, but obviously the urban challenges are very different here. And yet some solutions might lie in age-old practices that belong to indigenous peoples. And I'm just wondering if you have any examples that you've come across in your work that you might want to share with us.
I think first, in terms of similarity of struggle, is that in Kenya, for example, we have the Mau, the Oge community, for example, that lives in, that also has had a whole struggle, even in courts, to defend their land. And today, they have formed, together also with people from Madare Social Justice Center, and mostly within, pause on that first, but in Madare Social Justice Center, now to respond directly to your question on the urban struggles in terms of people defending themselves and defending the question of land. I think last year, following the demolitions after the floods in April, and the government brutally and in the most inhumane manner demolished many homes of people who used to live 30 meters along the river, and of course even some beyond 30 to around 45 meters. And after that, people have found a means to now start addressing this land question. And what they're doing is that they're planting food, vegetables, and trees along the river, which also to do that barely. And I think it is something that is a national question, but dealing with it grassroots also builds on consciousness in terms of our environment and in terms of the land question. Because when people occupy riparian land, when people occupy those spaces, it's a form of resistance, because the government itself did not want these people to occupy this land. In fact, we were arrested around twice, and when people attempted to occupy empty affordable houses because of that undignified means of demolishing homes, a lot of our comrades were arrested. Our community continually, our young people within that community are criminalized every day for planting trees. In many cases, it is officers from different police stations who go there to uproot the vegetables. But if you look at it on that side, you look at it as an economic activity, you'll also look at it as a point of resistance. But at the same time, it's a critical question, similar to the one that has been raised on the colonial aspect. Because people in Mathare, for example, they came during the colonial times to construct Nairobi. So most of those people have lived there for the longest time. To then look at what is happening as far as land. The other day we saw people in Narok being killed because somebody wants to grab land. You see? And when consistently people are getting, a specific group of people is getting really greedy in owning land, you find a small group of people has a huge section of land, and then another big group of people has a very small section of land. I know it might have a problem to click in different minds to look at this as a similar challenge with indigenous peoples. Because what indigenous peoples in Mau do is that they organize through people's assemblies. So they meet as an assembly, and then they organize their community as an assembly. So all issues arising from that community can be handled as a collective means by everybody.
Community land committees, they're called.
And yes, but there are also the concept of assembly, which is what we're doing also with the social justice movement through different centers in Nairobi, because there are around 21 centers in Nairobi, but within Nairobi chapter there are, within the ones who are organized within Nairobi chapter, are around 5 social justice centers, which also organize in different informal settlements. And even they are using people's assemblies to talk about different issues, whether it is land, whether it is, for example, the question of the finance bill, whether it is the question of healthcare, education, different questions that arise from that community.
So I have a follow-up on that, but you did mention the issue of Narok and the Maasai people, and because I covered it, I think it's only fair that I give you an update. It's an area called Oldonyonyokie, which is just a little bit after Olepolos. And these guys own the land as a community, and they've been approached by a carbon developer because he wants to buy carbon credits from them. But the community is basically saying that they don't have enough information. They own the community land as a trust, and therefore it can't be sold as individual parcels. And it's brought so much havoc, which is why it resulted in death. So the Maasai basically took up their arms, and they unfortunately beat up someone to a pulp from the carbon developer. So this is a very real issue here in Kenya with indigenous problems. And so I come back to you with a question of decolonization, because Biani brought it up. And this is something that the Maasai also told me. They feel like it's just another guise for a land grab. So what do you think it really means to decolonize climate action, to ensure that the people you're talking about in Mathare feel empowered, that the people in the Ogiek of the Mau forest also feel equally empowered?
I think it's a task. Sometimes we say that it is the task of those who are conscious to make conscious the unconscious. But simply, it is that it is a duty for those who know about the robbery that is going on of land, and the fact that we need to find means to create agency of people, that people can be able to defend themselves. That it needs to get to a point where people do not look up to specific people to speak for them. It is the people, because land is the most crucial thing. It is the heart of all our struggles, because when you have land, you have food. But to deal with the colonial question, is that one, I think, as we move and as every conscious person works every day to make sure that our society is organized enough in different communities at the grassroots to gain a sense of people's agency, that people have the power, first of all, understand that, for example, all sovereign power belongs to the people. I think that is where decolonization begins. When people understand that all sovereign power actually belongs to the people, because if we defend our land, if we defend our food, our food sovereignty, if we defend our environment, they are misusing, for example, early entry permits to grab in the name of creating those carbon credit nonsense, which is robbery.
Carbon credit nonsense, like that.
Is robbery.
Okay, but because you're talking about empowerment, Joan here knows a thing or two about empowerment because you're working with youth and women from Nairobi's informal settlements. You said you're from Korogosho. So what strengths are you finding in young people and in women to fight against climate change?
I would say for the time I've been in Korogocho, I've seen women who really want change. They just don't know how to approach it. They just have no idea because at the moment that we have I think we have 3 different types of women. Classes or something, if I would say. So we have women who have their mothers and grandmothers in the same space. Women from 20 years and they have their mothers at the same space. And some also have their grandmothers and they also have children.
Please don't forget the microphone.
Oh yes. Okay, so I would say I've worked with women. I've seen women have a lot of challenges because these women actually have their mothers, have their grandmothers in the same space. You know, they're born in this very same space. They stay here, they see the same things, they see their mothers grow old in the same space. So I've seen women who really have the urge to witness other things outside, you know. So there's this feeling of what should we, how do we tackle this? And there's also this feeling, how do we get out of this space? How do we get out of this space? So it's just a matter of having someone as an artist in a community of people who have things to do, who are really willing to participate in different activities. They just don't have the right channels to, but women are powerful. Like, women are ready. Women and children even I'm working with women who are really ready to experience change. It's not just, people should not look at the slum areas like, there are these women who are, people are just suffering. You know, we're having people who coming to the slums to give handouts like food, mattresses. I personally feel that as much as they take these mattresses and the food that they offer, there's real power behind this. They will say, okay, we are taking your mattresses, we are taking your food, but please show us how you got out of this. Show us what you do there. We want to know. Yeah, so it's...
Yeah. So basically you're advocating for something that I think Biani is also doing, which is strengthening the relationship between culture and peoples to sort of create solutions. So Biani, I want to come to you and ask, how does cultural resilience, which we're hearing about here, particularly around the issue of women, tie into climate resilience?
Yes, I think it's related with culture, but also I like what you mentioned, because I think we ended in the same point, because culture is on top and is what we can easily see, the expression of the communities, but inside the structures are very important to recover. Many communities, we are recovering the original ways, and also assemblias is very, very important, and they had been broken as well with intentions from states to not sustain, of course, those lands. So recovering the memory and strengthen the assemblias and the collective governments is very important, but also the identity. But the identity, yes, from the past, but also from the current way of living right now, because indigenous peoples we are tend to see as pieces of museums that are not don't speak or don't evolve, but we are evolving. We are several generations that are studying. We are learning another language, like myself, or traveling or doing other things, also using technology to strengthen back the community and have those alliances and learn from other indigenous peoples.
But how easy is it or difficult to translate this knowledge to a scientist? Because normally what I hear scientists saying is that, okay, this is just folklore, it's unscientific. What does ritual, language, traditions have to do with climate action?
Yeah, you're right, because it's so hard to mix those different languages. And with the time, what I must say, and many researchers don't like it, is that they need to understand, especially if they are not from a community, that they are not going to understand some things. No, never. You can go and study a community and live there for 4 years, but you are not going to understand the deep sense. Like sometimes we talk like you cannot dream the same things that we dream. So that is not going to end in a book or in a research or in a paper. But what we can try to understand is the translation of that information. For example, in my research, there were many pieces that I decided not to put in written, but it was for the community. And there are other pieces, other parts of that big information that came from the research, that it needs to end in science, because they need to know as well what is happening with data. So I did a bunch of calculations and statistics, and that is the language of science. And we as indigenous peoples, some of us are also translating our information into that data, and we can tell them what we want to say in the same language, their language. And sometimes we don't need to force these conversations, because we can respect each other. Science has their process. Many people tend to say that we have science as well, but since science and academy belongs to a colonized and power process, I don't like to call it.
But do you
like
really
that.
see those two as being incompatible rather than being able to work collaboratively?
No, yes, they are collaborative, but it's important to differentiate those two different knowledges. One is no better than the other, but they're different. But we can still be together in some things.
Yeah, and so you've introduced the question of power dynamics, which I think Waringa has been speaking about for a really long time now. So when you look at international arenas like, you know, the UN, international climate systems, do you see progress towards embracing indigenous leadership, listening to people like you guys sitting here to make that part of the global approach to climate action?
I think that one can be well answered by people who have attended COP. And I think with COP, many times, is that if you don't have that, what is it called, the blue tag.
I know exactly what you mean.
You can't go in, you're just somewhere shouting in the periphery, right to environmental care things. So really, they don't listen. So the fight, I think, is in the grassroots. And I don't know whether the audience can see what this fighter is wearing. She has a lot of art from, I presume, is coming from, I don't know, but it's very artistic. When you look at her, you'll see later. But it's very nice because it is responding to what you were saying of how people use art to mirror our society. But in response to, I said that the UN structures of climate change and climate conversations and advocacy, they don't really listen to climate activists, genuine, authentic climate activists and grassroots.
What do you mean genuine activists?
Because it's very difficult to be able to finance yourself to get the blue thing. You really need to be connected. And those are the ones that make legislative changes. So if there is going to be a change in environmental law, those people discussing in that blue room thing will be the ones who will decide. But the ones who every day live to defend the environment, who every day live to advocate against plunder of our environment, will be outside saying things which are genuine things, but they're not listening. Because even if you look at this question, the ones who genuinely defend our environment, they do the genuine Lord's work because they wake the consciousness of people to the reality of life. To see that right now they are talking about carbon credits, which they are very loud about. But in actual sense, the people who are paying the price, including those people who are killed in Narok, and many other people who are having their lands robbed in Kenya so that people, even KWS is giving a lot of rich people early permits so that they can get a permit to be enlisted as a person who owns many trees so that you can get money from the credits. But if you look at it critically, the countries that are paying for African countries mostly for these carbon credits are the ones who are polluting the environment. They're creating wars that are consistently destroying our environment, and it is wars that have nothing to do with, they're not progressive wars. They're not helping anybody because they're not defending the dignity of people. It is not people who are fighting so that they can say this is our land, for example. It is not people who are fighting so that they can say we need healthcare, we need education, we need a water system, that we need to drink clean and safe water. It is there just so that they can continue maintaining structures of power and money.
So why keep attending? Why do we still have a Kenyan charter? You know, why? Why are we then putting our flags in the ring?
In the previous session, our LSK president said that these things take time. And again, it is the duty of the conscious to make the unconscious conscious. So it is just that everybody who is not in that blue room and is a genuine activist for this environment, they shouldn't give up. They must continue at their grassroots work. Because, for example, and let me digress a little from this environmental question and go to this question of extrajudicial killings.
Wow, yeah, because they're so easy to walk
Connect.
back and forth from. Yeah.
Yeah. Because, for example, the social justice movement was begun in 2015. In 2015, extrajudicial killings were a normal affair. Like in Mathare or the informal settlements of Nairobi, a young person could just be shot dead. Like we have documented many stories of even young people who have been shot dead by police officers in a hotel while you are eating food, or they got you from your house and just shot you dead. Many stories that have been recorded. But the MSJC's Mathare Social Justice Center started a campaign against normalization of extrajudicial killings in 2015. And then sparked other social justice centers in Kenya to also start talking to form, number one, and also start addressing this question of extrajudicial killings and enforced disappearances. Many activists, human rights defenders, paid with their lives. Karo Mwatha case in example. They paid with their life that conversation of defending. But right now, it is the Kenyan people every day waking up and saying, okay, enough. These extrajudicial killings must come to a halt. You see, it has taken 10 years for consciousness of this question of extrajudicial killings and to build the courage. Every year since 2018, the social justice movement on the 7th day of July comes out to the streets every year since 2017 to just say it is Saba March for our livelihoods.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
it takes time.
Takes time, be patient. I mean, I don't know how much more patient the world can be given that it's kind of burning.
But they say that there are decades where nothing happens, and then there are weeks where decades happen. So you never really know. That's not my quote, by the way, but I don't know who said it.
But I would love it on a t-shirt. So it's great that you've actually changamshed the audience because it's now time for you to participate. You weren't just here to observe, you know. So if you have some questions for the ladies, please do let us know. Yeah, we'll start with you. We've got another one at the back there.
Okay, so mine is to Biani. I hope I got that right. It's about the collective governance that you talked about. Because I'm a writer and a filmmaker, and a lot of my works set in the future. But I keep imagining a future where we've gone back to the governance systems that existed before colonialism. And if you look at a lot of Africa, we didn't have centralized governments. we had kings, but it was just here and there. Very few communities had kingships or centralizations of any kind. And I keep imagining we can go back to that, and it will solve a lot of problems that we are experiencing today. Because I think in the whole world, the big problems we experience is because a few people make decisions for everybody. So I've researched a lot about collective governance that's happening around. I saw one, or I came upon one example. I forget the country in Latin America, but it was in the 70s, and it used technology, because I think phones, the smartphone technology today can help a whole country decentralize, you know. But there was, I think.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but what is your question?
I'm asking the question. Yeah, I've got a lot of these examples, but then I wanted to know more about the one you talked about, the mechanics it works, how it works and how it functions, and if there's a possibility of it upscaling in your country to, in future, being the only kind of governance. And then secondly, for my own, I don't know if I can get access to your paper for my own knowledge and enrichment.
Shoot us, shoot.
Thank you. It's a little bit complex, and every culture have their own differences and specificities. But in many cases, you can Google many examples just in Mexico, but also in other countries like Nepal, for example, that they're recovering the previous system, but in, how to say, like legalize it, because many of our traditional governments exist within those democratic systems, kind of hiding there. So it's not very obvious, and not a lot of people know about them. But one key thing that I would say related to collective government is the circulation of power. So the representatives are only on service of communities. They don't receive most of the time payments, but they are all the time like going ranking levels from below to the top, and not everybody reach the top because they need to prove to the community that they are able to be there in that position. And the positions are always circulating. Generally is 1 year or 3 years, depending on the communities. But I think that is very, very important, because in the previous panel, and also you mentioned that about the problems related to leaderships, the leaderships that are like public and mainstream, because usually they tend to concentrate the power. But in the communities, if we educate the leaders, and everybody can be a leader depending on the community.
Wow. One day, one day. There was a second question. Yeah, you have such lovely hair. That was definitely your compliment. Gentleman in blue, we'll come to you after this.
Thank y'all. Thank y'all.
You have lovely hair too.
Hi everyone. For the lady from Oaxaca, I've been there. It's a wonderful, beautiful. I think Mexico. I'm from California, so it's formerly Mexicali. So I consider myself an honorary Mexican. But the land of Oaxaca is absolutely beautiful and enchanting. So thank you, and just wanted to say that real quick. But my question is, I'm American, and I'm considering building an eco-village of people who want to just kind of live off the land. We don't know if we want to do it here in Kenya or back in the States. We're just kind of grappling with that. But I've heard you guys speak about colonizers and people coming in from outside. And so I have a question, because who else can I ask it to? You know, how do you really feel about outsiders? And there was this question also too about who's indigenous, because technically, yes, I'm from America, but I'm also technically from somewhere in Africa. I don't know where. I'm not trying to hyper fantasize about returning to Africa, but let me go back to my question. My question is, how do you really feel about outsiders, Americans coming and possibly taking the land? And then how can we, if you're cool with it, how can we do it in a way that honors the culture, the land, the people, the money, all that stuff?
Waringa, I think you should take this one, being a lawyer. Land stewardship, dispossession of persons.
I think first, as a person who is not from the country, before I get to addressing the colonial question, is
what do you mean a person who's not from the country?
No, that's why I said before I get, I'm answering as a lawyer. You asked me as a lawyer first.
Okay.
Because technically the constitution already provides that you cannot own land in Kenya, for example. You can only lease it for 99 years, no? So technically, I don't even think you have the capacity to grab land unless you decide to be an actual, colonialism. Wait.
Sema ikutoke.
Colonialism. You see, to be a colonizer, you really have to be without humanity. And if you have humanity to create an ecological village, I don't think you can qualify. They come as missionaries and things like that sort of blind people. But to be a colonizer, you really have to be a brutal human being. You must not care about the humanity of people. You must only care about the greed of capital. And you must only care to build yourself as an individual and not collectively. But people from outside, what qualifies someone to say that you're from outside? Because most of all of these boundaries we have even in Africa, they are colonial boundaries. They're not boundaries that anybody created. So you really cannot call, a Ugandan cannot come to Kenya and call themselves an African. Mathare is filled by different communities. It has Burundi, it has Uganda, has Congo. It's a whole nation on its own. This country itself is housing many people. In fact, there is a whole question of political economy that asks how about this question of refugees even, because if you move from Nairobi to when you're heading to Isiolo, that route going to Ethiopia, you'll find like 20 something or between 10 and 20 something road stops. And people are made to stop and look at their IDs and things like that. And I know I'm digressing from the question of land. But if you go to the border itself, it only has like one checkpoint, which is, I don't know after how long. So these boundaries, people move all the time. And in fact, to even know that someone has been caught as an immigrant, you already moved into Kenya and you were probably arrested on your road somewhere in Nairobi. So how did you even come in? You see, so, and then you're deported back, and then maybe in like 2 weeks, you're already back into the country.
Waringa, I don't think you've answered her question though. How do you really feel about ownership of land by foreign nationals?
If you're in Nanyuki and you're opening a whole space to oppress people and open a Batuk station, and then kill and dispossess people of Laikipia land, oppress the people of Laikipia by giving them fake jobs and raping their women, you're a colonizer. But if you come to Nyeri, or you go to Mathare, for example, and decide to open an ecological village along the whole route of Mathare, empower the community of Mathare, and not give donations, as Mama was saying here, charity. Because as we don't want charity, as we want dignity. So if your cause is a cause of dignity, is a cause of social justice, is a cause for human rights, then you're welcome. Pio Gama Pinto is our hero.
Yeah.
Pio Gama Pinto fought for the liberation of this country. He was of Asian origin.
Yes, well,
my son's name is Pinto.
We can start a whole conversation here about colonization and how Pio's ancestors came here through force and violence, but that's a conversation for another day. Gentleman in blue, we have you there, and then we'll get the lady with the scarf here. You've been raising your hand for a little bit, and then we'll continue after that.
Thank you. I think this is a question, I think, just to summarize everything that we've discussed, I can see there's multiple nationalities we're dealing with, but I think we're at a point where the question of land back has been co-opted, and we're told we don't need access to our land. Once we're given bread, it's enough. So I'm interested in, I think the question would be, the land back movement building from a transnational sense and moving away from the co-optation of ecological justice and resistance being watered down to plant a tree, take care of a tree, and you've done enough for the climate. And I think this comes with President Ruto's directive, where in the next 5-10 years he's going to build 50 million trees, but he's selling our land in terms of carbon credits to the Arabs. Qataris own more land than I think they reach the level of Uhuru's family. So I'm interested, I think, what lessons can we learn from especially the urban informal settlements? Because Waringa has spoken so much on the intersections, what Madare is doing in terms of protecting the sanctity of human life and protecting the tree, and also the limits of classism, but also what is Latin America doing where we can learn. And I think also from our sister Joan giving us lived experiences. I think Joan has been fighting for a really long time and goes as an environmentalist. So can we move from environmentalists to ecological justice resistors rather than just fixating on that, plant a tree today and you've done enough for the climate? Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, John.
Thank you so much. I feel really good about what you've said. It's not, I think it doesn't have to be, let's plant a tree. That is, we passed that. Like, whatever is happening now, it's too much, you know. I'm advocating for a revolution, you know, and let's have a revolution of different artists coming together. Let's talk to the children. They have time. They have more time. They're still, you know, they're still young. They have more time to understand a lot of things about the environment, about land, about people. One step at a time. Could we have these different artists who would meet different people in the community? For example, I have a project in a community where a Luo community. I'm from a Luo tribe of Kenya. So I went to this community where we have, in a slum area, we have different communities. They live differently in an open space. So let's have different people advocating for different stuff concerning the environment. But let's do a revolution. Let's start a revolution. Let's start it with children. We have so many children. Come on, let's start it with children. And let's make noise, you know, and think differently about environment.
I like that, starting young and also leveraging what different communities are already good at. So I've just been given an indication of 5 minutes, and I'm an African, so I'm going to ignore that and just take the next two questions. Well, okay, one question. In that case, I must give it to you with a scarf.
Hello, everybody. I don't necessarily have a question, so excuse me, but I really do want to say something that I think really needs to be said. There is a war happening in Sudan, and we're talking about indigenous people, and oftentimes Sudan gets left out of the indigenous conversation, although I and many other Sudanese people know the amount of grief we felt after being disconnected from the land. So I really just want to use this opportunity to remind all of us that there's a war and that the effects of the war are more than just devastating, that they are unfathomable and immeasurable, to the extent that despite the fact that the River Nile, the largest river in the whole world, runs through Sudan, people don't have clean drinking water and are resorting to drinking unfiltered Nile water, and as a result, a cholera outbreak has happened in Sudan right now, is currently happening in Sudan right now. I think our attention and our capacity to draw our attention to the things that really matter is the most powerful thing we can do right now as a collective. So please, 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 there is an entire diaspora of Sudanese refugees currently here in Nairobi, and all of us are hurting really bad because nobody is paying attention to us. So please, 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 please pay attention to Sudan. Remember Sudan, just think about Sudan, talk about Sudan whenever you can, wherever you can. Thank you.
Thank you. Are you from Khartoum? Yeah, it's awful what's happening there. Thank you for reminding us. And also because the situation in Darfur was also because of a climate issue, lack of resources for the herders and farmers. It's a story repeated across Africa. But I don't want us to end on this very gloomy note, because we've been speaking a lot about wisdom from the past, the struggles of the present, and now the uncertainty of the future. But I just want you all to tell me very briefly, like German time briefly, what gives you hope for the future and climate action? Let's start with you, Joan.
Personally, as an artist, I'll talk. Personally, as an artist, I see, I'm in a slum where people, children are born every day, many children. So my hope is so many children are getting born at the moment, and I'm going to have so many conversations with so many people growing up. As long as I'm alive, I'm going to have these children, and we're going to start a revolution.
Oh, I love that, Biani.
Thank you. I just want to add quickly to the first question about the village. Just review about gentrification before deciding. And also about the other question, just move away from conservationist plans. Like there are a lot of proofs, research about how that damage was, especially Africa and other places, through these conservationist plans that were made and continues. And what gives me hope is just to see through my work that communities can be strengthened, because we were so fractured in many places in Mexico, and I see my own community as an example, and very happy that is just alive and thriving, even though all the colonial time, but also seeing the proof that in other places we can be collective.
I like that. Waringa.
I think I will also like my dada here.
Please, the question is, what gives you hope?
It is there, it is heading there. Sorry, timekeepers. But I think first in response to my ndugu there is that there is a quote also that I'll use, which is not mine, so that I can use German time, which says that planting trees without dealing with social justice questions like food, healthcare, water is simply gardening. It's not dealing with speaking. But what gives me hope is that ours is a struggle for land, is a struggle for food, and is a struggle for freedom. It's not one that doesn't know what we are struggling about. So as long as people in Kenya are fighting to defend their dignity, as long as people in Sudan are fighting to defend their dignity, as long as people in Palestine are fighting to defend their dignity, as long as all oppressed people of the world are fighting to defend their dignity, I think victory is certain. Yeah. So, yeah.
Thank you so much to my panelists this afternoon, Waringa Wahome, Joan Otieno, and Bia'ni Madsa Juárez López. It is said that Indigenous persons are the custodians of our planet, our rivers, our oceans, our forests. And our world is shrinking not because Indigenous people forgot what to do, it's shrinking because we forgot to listen to them. So thank you all for your attention.